constitute 15, 20, 25% of the expenditure of a business. And you can see it would really be an oddball comparison of similar local versus non-local businesses where you would get a higher multiplier from the non-local business. I did a study last year in Detroit looking at the impact of a 20% shift in consumer expenditure in the city to Detroit-grown food. As many of you know, Detroit is a city that was built for 2 million people. Today there are fewer than 1 million people living there, a lot of abandoned land, abandoned buildings. And yet, a remarkable thing is that people, perhaps out of desperation and necessity, are beginning to do farming on some of this land. So there's a greening of Detroit. And the question was, so if you got a 20% shift of residents in Detroit toward this Detroit-grown food, what would be the impact? Turns out it's 5,000 jobs. Now suppose you got the 5 surrounding counties around Detroit in the name of regional solidarity to also move toward 20% consumption of Detroit grown. That would be 40,000 jobs. This could be the most significant economic development policy to hit the Motor City. And to think that all the city founding fathers can think about for the last 20 years is casinos. And all they're thinking about now is a bailout of the automobile industry, and this kind of stuff is getting no attention whatsoever. It's outrageous. A third feature about locally owned businesses. Because local businesses tend to buy goods locally, there's less shipping of the inputs into the local businesses and less shipping outside of them. That means less energy use, less carbon emissions. Now, there have been a number of cutesy articles in the press over the last year or two saying, well, generally, yes, localization means a lower carbon footprint, but there's so many exceptions. How can you support localization? And a classic example of this is in the New York Times op-ed page 2 summers ago. There was a piece where the author said, great new study out that shows that if you buy lamb from New Zealand and you're living in Great Britain, the local lamb would have 4 times the carbon impact as you're importing New Zealand lamb. Therefore, we need to keep importing New Zealand lamb. And you can find variations on this study, you know, with apples and other stuff that are still quoted widely. Now, I was very interested in this study and decided to do something that the editors of the New York Times did not do, which is actually read the study. First of all, guess who published it, who financed it? Yes, the New Zealand Lamb Export Association. This was their home run. What did they look at? They looked at badly done bionic industrial lamb in the United Kingdom versus badly done industrial lamb in New Zealand. And it turns out that the industrial lamb in New Zealand, because so many of the electricity-intensive inputs use clean hydropower, these are sort of green bionic lamps. Whereas in the United Kingdom, skeptics come back with and say, well, yes, all things being equal, a local potato versus a non-local potato. Yes, the local potato, you will get greater wealth effects, greater multiplier, more reliability, tourism, civil society, creative economy, and so forth. But we live in an era where bigger is better. Bigger box is cheaper. Bigger businesses achieve higher economies of scale. And the argument is essentially that local businesses can't compete.